We're now a week out from the Cardano Summit and weeks out from Alonzo, and things are starting to feel a little bit different. It feels like we're approaching a bit of a tipping point. Cardano is suddenly getting unexpected respect from non Cardano crypto institutions. And when Charles gives these interviews and starts all of his crazy talk about changing the world and giving everyone a seat at the table, you can tell people are starting to wonder if he might just pull it off. Ready? Let's go. Sometimes the discussions we have on this channel are about big, grandiose ideas, large themes, or semi-obscure connections between things that might allow us to speculate about what's coming down the line. Sometimes these discussions are about rundowns of news items. And sometimes we just take a step back, look at the bigger picture, and have a casual conversation about where we're at as a Cardano ecosystem. This discussion today is going to be the last of those three things. When I first heard that Grayscale had dropped a document they were calling an introduction to Cardano, I was very curious. You'll remember we've talked before about Grayscale and Digital Currency Group and historical relations with Cardano or lack thereof. We had that discussion when Grayscale suddenly started offering products that involved Cardano. It was quite a turn of events and a little bit unexpected, unless you're thinking about a rational institution trying to offer the largest market cap products. Then it makes perfect sense. But if you think about the relationship between Digital Currency Group or, like I said, lack of relationship with Cardano in the past, it was a little bit of a surprise. So when I saw that they had dropped sort of an explainer article about Cardano, half of me was thinking, okay, so they sell a Cardano, a product that is related to Cardano. So maybe it'll be pretty positive. But then another part of me was thinking, okay, what kinds of backhanded compliments will be involved in this document? Because that's what we're used to seeing out of sort of crypto institutions that historically have not embraced Cardano. Maybe that's the most diplomatic way to put it. So I was a little bit surprised when I started seeing chatter on Twitter that the Grayscale introduction to Cardano was actually very balanced and fair. That was a little bit shocking to me because, I mean, even though I know it's in their best interest to make a good pitch for Cardano because they're selling a Cardano related product, I was still a little bit surprised when I heard this was very balanced and fair. And actually, as you look through the document, this is it right here. It is very balanced. It's there's a lot of empirical stuff in here, which makes it, the more empirical characterization you do of something like Cardano, it seems like the more fair a characterization you're going to get, but it's pretty fair and balanced. I mean, as you go through it, if you're very, very familiar with Cardano, certain things are going to jump out at you. Like you're going to notice this. Cardano was founded in 2015 by technologist Charles Hoskinson and his co-founder, Jerry Wood. Of course, if you're familiar with Cardano, you might know this person as Jeremy Wood, and you find yourself wondering, okay, Grayscale presumably has a very highly paid team. How on earth are they misnaming one of the founders of Cardano? Like, there's got to be somebody checking those kinds of things, right? But then again, if autocomplete mistakes were capital crimes, we'd probably all have nooses around our necks, right? As you look through the rest of the document, it is actually pretty fair. I mean, they even break down, some of the things about the founding of Cardano are actually very, very positive and flattering about Cardano. When you look at certain things like the ADA distribution, how little of the coin actually went to the founders. Of course, we've looked at all those Masari tables where we show that, projects like Cardano and Ethereum tend to stay under a 20% distribution to founders and investors, initial sort of institutional investors. and the rest is kind of out to the public. And a lot of other projects, you have this gigantic chunk, like in a lot of cases in excess of 50%, that actually end up in the hands of insiders. They also hit some of the well-known strengths of Cardano, such as Ouroboros being provably secure via peer-reviewed research, something we inside the ecosystem focus on a lot, but maybe a lot of people outside the ecosystem don't look at too often. Then they hit some things that I think even within the Cardano ecosystem, we probably don't talk about as much as we should, like this: the ratio of market cap to the value of payments processed on the network over the last 12 months. I'm not sure why LTM payment is a a less awkward way to talk about it rather than, payments over the last year or payments per year based on the last 12 months. I don't know if LTM is something that really needs its own acronym like that, but they do make a really good point. When you look at market cap, so the market cap of Cardano on the date they published this paper, or at least the date they ran their numbers from, was 75 billion. Ethereum was 400 billion, and Bitcoin was 888 billion. But then you look at the value of payments processed over the last 12 months, and you have these numbers: 1.6 trillion, 2.8 trillion, and 3.1 trillion. So when you look at the ratio of those values, you see that Bitcoin has this super, super high ratio, right? Like the market cap most strongly reflects the value of payments processed on the network. Ethereum somewhere between, and Cardano is this tiny ratio, which is, a lot of people would interpret this to mean that Cardano is highly undervalued. We, of course, don't talk about price on this channel, but I thought it was really interesting. An institution like Grayscale, which is in the business of talking about these kind of things, they focused on something that we probably don't emphasize enough in the Cardano ecosystem. Like, they're really legitimately doing their best to create a document here to sell Cardano to the average people out there. I would say consumers, but of course they have limitations on who they're supposed to be targeting these documents to. But this document, in sum, it's a pretty good little explainer 101 document. If you had somebody who you were trying to explain Cardano to, who was a little bit empirically oriented, who would be able to consume a little bit of data, albeit presented in, pretty consumable graph form in most cases, this is not a bad little explainer document. Look at this. They even used the Coin98 ecosystem map. I think they could have used, we have much, much bigger maps of the ecosystem than this, but at least they threw that in there. I think this is a pretty good little explainer document. And the fact that an institution, and at this point in crypto, I am calling Grayscale an institution. At this point, an institution like Grayscale putting together a document like this that pretty fairly depicts the strong points of Cardano, I think this is a pretty big step forward. I don't think we've ever seen anything this comprehensive. I mean, it's only 23 pages long. I think a lot of us in the Cardano ecosystem could probably write for hundreds of pages about Cardano, or at least talk that much on videos about Cardano. But for an institution like this, that's not really a part of the Cardano ecosystem outside of offering this Cardano related product, for them to produce a 23-page document about Cardano, I think this is a pretty big threshold we've just passed in terms of sort of the larger crypto space accepting Cardano's position in that world. Then we have this interview that Charles did with Naomi Brockwell when they were both down at the Satoshi Roundtable in Mexico. You can see they're obviously at a very beautiful resort here, a hotel of some type. The Satoshi Roundtable is something that people have sort of jokingly, not so jokingly, referred to as the Bilderberg group of crypto, which is pretty funny. But what I noticed about this interview, this is something I've commented on recently. Even when Charles gives these interviews to people who are a little bit more outside the Cardano ecosystem, he seems to take an appropriately different tact, right, on the interview. He has a slightly different approach. He knows he's going to be addressing a crowd that is much more outside the Cardano ecosystem. And what's interesting, if you're used to watching his AMAs, his responses to questions are a little bit more revealing. I think when he's addressing us within the Cardano ecosystem, he's a little bit more fine grain, and he assumes that we kind of know the fundamental thesis and why we're doing all these little fine grained things. And he's talking to us about, the conceptual antecedents of mithril. Whereas in this interview, there's less of that and more just like more of the why and less of the how, which is really interesting if you're used to him getting into fine grained detail for hours at a time about the how. And in this interview, it gets really interesting when he starts talking about Bitcoin. And he basically says something we've heard him say before, but I think he says it very concisely here. He says the problem with Bitcoin is basically governance, because you can't evolve if there's no governance. He points out that everything started in Bitcoin, side chains, smart contracts. These were all things that people wanted to do in Bitcoin originally. Charles famously created a course to evangelize Bitcoin, teach people about Bitcoin. That was kind of his big start in the space. He points out that Vitalik would have just tried to build smart contracts in Bitcoin with colored coins if he could have. Charles says that he himself never would have been involved in BitShares, except that there was no way to do all the things he wanted to do in Bitcoin. You just can't have a DEX in Bitcoin. You can't have an algorithmic stablecoin in Bitcoin. And I know some of you out there are probably jumping up and saying, well, no, you can. I'm going to wrap my Bitcoin and do it, that way. He, of course, means, in a way that's much more native to the actual blockchain, Bitcoin. But Charles also, so at the same time, there's another dynamic to this that he talks about. He says that humans are creatures of spice and diversity. I like the way he put that, creatures of spice and diversity. And just like there could never be one religion, everyone choosing the exact same religion, or everyone choosing, the exact same car, everyone liking the same music. Humans, by their nature, need that diversity. And this is where he launches into one of the things I love to hear people in crypto talk about, and this is this idea of a universal wallet. So Charles says, because humans are these creatures of spice and diversity, when we're doing transactions, we do all kinds of transactions as a global economy. And he's like, when I go to buy something from someone, he's not talking about himself, but a person, when a theoretical person goes to buy something from someone else, it may be that they want to pay with, euros or dollars or yen or whatever, and the other person wants to accept that same fiat currency. But again, humans, creatures who like diversity and spice, it may also be that I want to pay with some kind of tokenized share of the equity in my house. It may be that I've somehow acquired some kind of tokenized interest in raw lumber. It may be that I want to pay with frequent flyer miles. Like, we have all these different types of value that we encounter in our life, and we're forced to convert them all into dollars and euros and yen and RMB and all these currencies. And there are all these I'm putting a lot of words in his mouth here, but we've heard him talk about this many times. So we're forced to convert them into these fiat currencies and transact that way. But what if I could pay in frequent flyer miles, and the person I'm doing the transaction with, he wants to receive his value in terms of tokenized interests in a condo development in, wherever, in Bangkok, in Australia, in Oregon. Maybe he wants shares of Tesla. It shouldn't really matter. And one day, if we can have universal wallets where I can pay with whatever form of value I want to pay in, and he can receive whatever form of value he wants to receive, neither of us needs to know what form of value the other person is trading in. The wallet can very easily convert those two and make all of the exchanges and swaps necessary for me to pay in the form of value I want to pay in, and he can receive the form of value he wants to receive. And we don't even need to know what each person is receiving. For Charles, it seems that's just part of his larger dream that the coffee farmer in Ethiopia and Bill Gates can both have access to all the same systems. And he says Bitcoin can't do this because the people controlling Bitcoin won't release control to let it evolve. That's why we had an Ethereum. That's why we have a Cardano. That's why we have a lot of these altcoins, because people wanted to develop things on Bitcoin, but because there's no governance system in Bitcoin, the people controlling Bitcoin wouldn't allow it to evolve in those ways. And Charles thinks this is kind of a universal human thing. He has this social sinkhole analogy. You've probably heard him talk about it before, but he very concisely sums it up in this interview. He says, when you have a sinkhole, it forms from the bottom up. You might be driving on that road every single day, and it feels very firm. You have no idea there's a sinkhole underneath the road. And then suddenly your car falls in one day. It goes from looking like a perfectly viable road to your car falling into a sinkhole. And he says social institutions are the same. The institution seems very firm right up until the point your car falls in the hole and the institution turns out to be completely unsound when it appeared to be sound, because change happens from the bottom up. And of course, he talked about his banner on Twitter, which I think most of you are probably aware. That was a somebody corrected me just today. I think it told me it was actually a wedding, and I believe I always thought it was a funeral. And Charles even mentions it was a funeral in this video, but I was informed it was actually a wedding. But it had every royal house, virtually every royal house in Europe, and they'd all been sort of part of these royal families that had controlled their lands for centuries in a lot of cases. And it seemed like nothing would happen to those royal houses. And within something like, this was right before World War I, I think, and in a couple of decades, almost every single one of these royal houses had been upended and replaced with a nation state or the precursor to a nation state or some other type of new regime. When probably prior to this, at the time of this event, in the banner on his Twitter account, it was probably almost impossible to imagine anything like that happening in such a short amount of time. The institutions seem to be very, very firm because no one realized a sinkhole was slowly growing from the bottom up. We've sort of seen the same thing happening recently with corporations like Evergrande in China. Just a couple of years ago, Evergrande was maybe the biggest real estate company in the world. Now it's number 2 in China, but still one of the biggest real estate companies in the world. And of course, everybody kind of knew that this mountain of debt was piling up. And, there were analysts saying, hey, this is headed in a bad direction. So there were people calling this. But now we see this thing completely imploding, and we get headlines like this. I have nothing left to live for. Evergrande meeting descends into chaos as investor pulls knife and threatens to kill herself. There's actually a full 10-minute video of this whole event posted. This Yahoo News article, I guess originally it was posted to Weibo, which I believe is the Chinese version of Twitter. What's really interesting though is that this is as much as sort of Western commentators have been saying that Evergrande was headed for a world of hurt because the amount of debt it was piling up. There were still a ton of people, probably like this lady, investing in Evergrande right up until very recently. I think if you look at the history of Evergrande and the employees investing in the wealth products offered by Evergrande, people buying, investing intergenerational amounts of money into real estate development projects of Evergrande, just buying units in these things that sometimes end up being ghost towers. If you look at that, nobody expected that there was a sinkhole underneath the very pleasantly booming facade of Evergrande until all of a sudden they found themselves in the sinkhole. Charles takes this pretty far. He says, hey, how come this can't happen with the Fed or the SEC? Maybe the Fed can be replaced with an algorithmic stablecoin, and maybe it happens from the bottom up in this same sort of sinkhole fashion. That to me was a very revealing glimpse into the mind of One Pen Charlie, the radical. Next, Charles starts talking about he he had someone in the Cardano ecosystem get a tattoo of Charles's face when he was in Mongolia with the hawk on his arm, wearing all the Mongolian stuff. And Naomi Brockwell has a pretty funny reaction to this. She's like blown away that somebody has Charles's face tattooed on their body. And she's talking about how Charles has super fans now. And he kind of shrugs this off. And he says, the thing about Cardano is that people get so deeply involved in the ecosystem, not because of the money. It's not about the money. It's really about people knowing the institutions are about to undergo a reformation and they want a seat at the table wherever we're going. I think that goes a long ways to explain a lot of the fervor in the Cardano ecosystem because a lot of people really can see the potential for a reformation of the institutions. And of course, they want to be a part of the movement that might replace those institutions. But I think Charles, if when the rubber meets the road, I think what Charles is really aimed at is not a reformation of the institutions where all the crypto people get a seat at the table. That's kind of what's happened with Bitcoin. You know, there was this Bitcoin revolution, and everybody who was already in Bitcoin got a seat at the table. They already had their Bitcoin; they're good. I think what Charles is really aimed at with this larger crypto thing, this post-Bitcoin thing that Cardano is a part of, is not that it's just the crypto people that get a seat at the table. I think he wants to take it to a place where everyone has a seat at the table. I hope he's right. I hope that's where we go. And I'll talk to you soon.